Welcome in, Scolders. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Someday Sports Podcast. We got myself, Kevin, Tom, and Pat all here to break down some more Minnesota sports for you guys, get you guys caught up on the latest news and notes from this week. Almost 1 week away from the big draft day, so we're all really excited for that. I know we're putting out a lot of content here, and we're going to be talking a lot about the draft. So this episode is going to be a lot about the NFL draft history, not only NFL quarterback history, but the Vikings and the ups and the downs, the Rick Spielman tenor moving into Kwesi's era, all the way going back to before Spielman in the early 2000s, and some of those fun drafts that we'll dive into here. So let's get started. Welcome in, guys.
What's going on, Kev? Pat?
9 days away, gentlemen.
Best day of the year, right? Every team's got hope and our dreams are coming true.
Yeah, it is kind of sad that I always used to tell myself, well, it's not the best day of the year because the Super Bowl is going to be the best day of the year. But
someday
it will be.
Someday.
When we're even close to that, or even sniff being close to that would be nice. Then I can kind of transition away from caring so much about drafts. Wouldn't that be nice if we're just the Chiefs or the frickin' Rams or just who cares about picks? Just have a good team.
I think I'd still really enjoy the draft, even if they're drafting 32 every year or not have a pick at all.
Yeah.
I think that's the fun thing about the NFL draft too, is that it is so deep every single year. Whereas if we're talking NBA or even MLB, it's really those top 5 picks that you're kind of thinking about churning out the next star. Whereas NFL, I mean, you're finding guys all throughout the first round and beyond who are stars and future stars too. So it's a lot of fun regardless.
So many fantasy implications too. So you're always wanting to get a leg up in the competition.
Yep, I agree. So let's take a dive down memory lane before we get into the Vikings history. Let's look into the NFL quarterback draft history. I know the last episode we dove into kind of just in general with Chris talking about how many of those quarterbacks have been successful over the years. And how do you define what a successful quarterback is? Is it a quarterback who plays out his rookie contract for you and has a couple of winning seasons, leads you to the playoffs, gets you a playoff win? Is it a quarterback who signs a second contract with your team and is there for 6+ years? I mean, you look at a guy like Kirk Cousins, plays here for 6 years, Dante Culpepper, 6 years. Fran Tarkenton's really the only guy who's had that long of a tenure outside of Tommy Kramer. I know when we looked up that in the past, it was multiple different stints for him. It just seems like quarterbacks are all over the board for Vikings history. It'd be nice to have one, wouldn't it? Just that we can rely on for at least 5 to 6 years, right? And then go from there.
Yeah, it's been a pretty pathetic quarterback history. I mean, just even in the last 25 years, bouncing around. I mean, when I was really young, the first quarterback I remember was Jeff George. And then it was Brad Johnson. And then it was Randall Cunningham. And then it was Brad Johnson again. And then we dealt with Tavares Jackson. And I mean, we didn't even talk about, or we skipped over Gus Frerotte for a while. And it's just one thing after another. And then you have Dante for a little bit. Yeah, a little stability would be nice, which was kind of fun with the Kirk years, the last 6 seasons.
Well, and that's, Kev, back to your point, it's hard to say what does that franchise quarterback look like or how do you define success? Because we did have a good number of years with Kirk where we saw relative success at the position more so than we have seen consistently over the history of this franchise. And so to me, when we're talking next step, it's getting us beyond what we were with Kirk, because you don't want to take a step back. So to me, it's consistently winning playoff games. It's consistently being considered in the contender realm. And of course, it's a team sport, so it's not all on the quarterback position. But at the same time, when you think of franchise guys and the true faces of the NFL, That's what I want. And I don't know if that's too much to ask for. It seems like it is at this point, but with all the excitement around the draft, that's what I'm really striving for to see coming out for the 2024, 25 and beyond years here.
I agree. I think that it's a really fine line, like you said, but once you kind of know when you see it with the guy. I mean, is it all on the stat sheet? No. The stats matter, yes. Do wins matter? Probably a little bit more. So you look at a guy like Teddy Bridgewater, super beloved here. Was he a successful draft pick from that standpoint up until the world fell out from underneath him on his leg injury? I don't really know looking back at it. I mean, he showed some flashes, but he was more of a game manager when we ran the football. He was decent in the 2-minute drill, but he wasn't lights out driving down the field when we were playing from behind. And obviously, it goes to we had some really good defenses with him as well, and we still really couldn't get the job done. So I think that's a good bar to start with, and then anything above a Teddy Bridgewater level of a quarterback talent, we could be content with. But obviously, we're craving a lot more drafting this high in the draft.
And it depends on where you're drafting, right? Like you said, I mean, Teddy was the 32nd pick, I think, right? We traded back in that last pick. It's different than trading up to 4 or 5 and trying to get Drake May. The expectations are a little different.
Yep.
Totally agree. And then you also see guys like Lamar Jackson who are going in the late first round. And I would consider Lamar Jackson a franchise quarterback. We're talking a multiple time MVP too. So I think again, when you're later in the first round there, I think expectations are a lot lower for kind of what that guy looks like. Is it more of a developmental guy who sits for a year or two, kind of like how we saw Jordan Love with the Packers? Or is it a guy who can kind of jump in right away? And I think this year we're seeing some of those older quarterbacks names a little more frequently towards the bottom of the first round too. So it's really interesting for sure.
Yeah, and obviously there's going to be some diamonds in the rough that you're going to find in the mid round. Very rare these days, outside of a Dak Prescott and a Brock Purdy. I can't come up with Russell Wilson. I
Right.
can't come up with 5 of them that have been outside of that first round marker.
Yeah.
Jalen Hurts,
Jalen Hurts, what was he, a second
Kirk.
round?
Around
Yeah.
there.
Round, yeah. So it's there are some diamonds in the rough, and it's up to you to find them, put them in a situation to succeed, and develop that. But just look at the first round because we do assume that we are going to be addressing this in the first round. I found this Reddit thread that this Chicago Bears fan was posting about not too long ago this offseason. There's been 30 quarterbacks drafted in the first round in the last decade, and he considers 12 of them to be successful NFL starters. Tom and I took a look at this list, and a couple of them we think would be successful, and a couple of them not successful. He has Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Tua, Herbert, Love, and Trevor Lawrence, all as successful starters out of that 30, so 12 out of 30. And then he considers these 18 to be unsuccessful picks. EJ Manuel, Blake Bortles, Johnny Manziel, Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, Carson Wentz, Paxton Lynch, Trubisky, Darnold, Rosen, Daniel Jones, Dwayne Haskins, RIP, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett. A lot of recent names on that list.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of those guys in the unsuccessful category are. I don't think Teddy was an unsuccessful pick. I think Teddy showed he was a starting quarterback in the NFL up until the injury, and even after the injury, he came back and has been a pretty average starting quarterback, but starter nonetheless. So I think that's a success of a pick. And Kev, you and I, we kind of talked about Carson Wentz a little bit. Those first 3-4 years of Carson Wentz's career were pretty flippin' good. I mean, he was MVP candidate. Now their team was really good. They won the Super Bowl that year without him, but I mean, he was really good.
It had to have just been injuries that really threw him for a loop there with that
I,
knee injury.
yeah, I think
Just absolutely wrecked his confidence.
there's a mental aspect of it that just he never bounced back from. But so I think that's a tough one. I mean, if he were to retire after 4 years, I think everyone would have thought it was a successful,
Yeah,
you know,
I agree. I mean, you'd like to get a guy like that who stays healthy. That's all part of it. There's many different factors that goes into what means being a successful quarterback in this league. If you have success for a couple of years, sure, that's great, but obviously we're craving that for not just a flash in the pan, play out your rookie contract, and then we start this process all over again like the Bears are doing. I don't want to do that. I want to have a guy
Yep.
that we're confident in for the foreseeable future. Um, Out of these 12 out of 30 picks that have a higher success rate, 5 of them were the number one overall pick, and Jameis being the only exception was the number one overall pick who could be viewed as unsuccessful. So that limits it as well. You're looking at a lot of guys who are drafted not number one overall who haven't been so successful. If you look at the 2020 draft, all 4 quarterbacks became successful starters, and even Jalen Hurts in the second round that year. So we're hoping that this year is a lot more like 2020 rather than 21, 22, 23.
I'm curious. So, and this is all subjective, right? Like determining what and who is successful here. And even out of those 12, I would say there's a number of guys who, to me, are good quarterbacks, but for whatever reason, whether it be the teams that they're on, but there isn't a ton of extended playoff success or things like that. You're looking at a guy like Trevor Lawrence or Kyler Murray, who are both on those lists. And again, I think we've all seen that those guys have a lot of talent, but we're now 4 or 5 years into these guys' careers where we're approaching that second contract. I know Kyler's got his money on that second contract, and I believe Lawrence is coming up due very soon here. Are those guys successful? We haven't seen the extended run. And again, I know it's all circumstantial with the teams kind of around them. I don't know. What's your thought on that? Because again, for me, I want to see, when I think of successful, I'm thinking that elevated tier, and maybe it is like a 3-tier system where you have these quality starters or quality guys who, yes, they're worth a first round pick because they gave you a number of years, but then maybe there's a franchise level that is above that, where we're talking about guys like Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, guys who can elevate their teams to that next level where you're perennially in contention for Super Bowls.
Right. And I mean, you can even break down it even more and more, like a guy like Justin Herbert. He struggled with injuries and has not done anything in the playoffs. People look at him as a prospect from when he came out. Sure, he got drafted really high. Nobody really knew what he was going to be, but if you ask a typical NFL fan, they will say, oh, for sure, he's been a successful quarterback in his career. It's really interesting to see because it all comes down to the offense you play in, the team you have supporting you. You think the Chargers have a good team every year, and then they fall short. So
they've had
I
bad
feel like,
coaching.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we even had that with Kirk. Kirk
Yeah.
was a really successful quarterback for us, but what do you view as a successful quarterback? And I think if it really fulfills all of our boxes that we want, it'll be evident early
Yeah.
that we'll have that. If you have to kind of argue for it, well, is he better than Teddy was his second season? Like, then you're really stretching. Like, well, Kenny Pickett wasn't good his rookie year. We'll be fine. Like, Bryce Young had a rough. It's like it all comes down to situation. I get that,
Yeah.
but I feel like we'll be able to tell.
I wonder for me if kind of that next bar, or what I'm looking for, is a guy who, when they get that second contract, and we all know how inflated quarterback money is, when they get that second contract, we're not worried about necessarily how that's going to impact the rest of the team. So for years and years, we talked about Kirk having a huge cap number, and everybody is right now, the rookie quarterback contract and building the roster out around that guy is such a huge thing right now. So now that Kyler Murray's cap hit is up, do those fans regret having that giant cap number to where they can't truly build the roster around that quarterback? Or is it a Pat Mahomes scenario where no matter what you're paying him, he's going to literally will your team into success because he is just that good? And I think there are a few guys kind of in that 12 category who could certainly fall under that bill.
I think Kyler, we kind of forget he came off an ACL injury last year. He came back, week 6, 7, 8, whatever it was. He was really good before that. And so even though he's got a big cap hit, I think he means a lot to his team. And so I don't think that's an unsuccessful pick. I don't think that they're regretting the cap hit because I think what he means to that team is a lot.
Look at a guy like Deshaun Watson. I mean, it's really hard to remember before all that stuff went down and the suspension and the trade and the awful
what he did for
Cleveland.
Houston was incredible. He
Right.
willed that team to, I think, a playoff win.
So it's like, what do you define as successful? Is it a playoff win? Is it multiple playoff wins?
I think when we want to talk about quarterbacks that elevate everybody else, there's only maybe 3 in the league. And so I think it's really unfair to use Mahomes, Josh Allen, and maybe Lamar. I think those guys are in their own tier right now.
I would say Aaron Rodgers would be on that list as well. I know he.
I think he used to be. I think he used to be. I don't think his last 2 years in Green Bay, he really elevated the team all that much. But I think it's those 3 right now. There's a lot of tiers after that I would consider successful.
And that's where I think it's not so simple as this 2-tier system, successful, unsuccessful. I think there's a lot more that goes into this that can define success and what that truly means. And it's all situational. We've spent our last 2 podcasts talking about the Vikings situation, and any rookie quarterback coming into this is probably going to be in a really high place to succeed just based on the surrounding pieces and the offensive coach and system that are kind of built around them. So I think that there's also a case where a lot of these unsuccessful quarterbacks in the first round, should they have been put into a different scenario, we might be talking about them in a very different light today, just based on where they were drafted.
Yeah, and I think Exhibit A is going to be right in front of us down at Egan. Sam Darnold. He's had his chance in the NFL. I get that. He played for some rough Jets teams that really didn't surround him with anything. He was the youngest player, I believe, in that draft, not only quarterback.
He's 20 years old.
And he got thrown into the fire with that media and eventually got shipped off to Carolina, who also really didn't know what they were planning as a franchise with head coach under turmoil and coordinator changes. He hasn't really had that stability yet in his career. He's still young. He's 26 years old, 2 years older than Justin Jefferson. That's crazy. So I think, all the things we talk about, if you give him the right ingredients, what can you make with it? And we're going to get a chance to see that, hopefully, with Darnold. I think, what if the answer's sitting right in front of us?
The issue, it's really unfair for some of these quarterbacks to get drafted in the top 5, go to a terrible team, probably a terrible coach, and probably a terrible owner. So it's just a bad organization overall. They get hung out to dry, and pretty much their career gets wrecked. Because after that, teams don't invest in them. They don't say, oh, you know what? Sam Darnold was the 3rd overall pick, was a young player. Let's give him a 4-year contract and work him through those 4 years. They say, let's give him 1 for 10, see what he can do. And then let's go trade up and get the guy we really want to invest in. So it's really unfortunate that we won't actually ever see what Sam Darnold could do in an offense that's tailored to his skill set and actually wants to invest in him as a player.
Well, we gave him $10 million, so I guess we'll find out here pretty soon. As far as just evaluating the quarterbacks in the past, let's say 5 years, does that make it a little bit easier to dissect? I mean, not many quarterbacks are around that have gotten drafted from before those 5 years. You can probably count them on one hand with the number of veteran quarterbacks that are lifetime backups now or no longer in the league. It's kind of a young quarterbacks league now. So if we just start with, let's go back to 2019 here. 2019, we got, let's see, Kyler Murray,
won.
Drew Lock. We got Dwayne Haskins,
Daniel Jones.
Daniel Jones. If we're talking about first round quarterbacks only, it wasn't a good draft. And none of them really had success. Gardner Minshew's still starting in this league, but he was a late round flyer. So
I kind of forgot Daniel Jones was the 6th overall pick.
yeah,
I mean, it feels like a reach now, but it was a reach at the time too. Like, I don't know that he was even guaranteed to be a first round pick going into the combine.
And that was a bad quarterback draft as well.
Yeah, which
If you
pushed
just look
his
at the
stock
talent.
up.
Right.
Oh, for sure. Jared Stidham, the 4th round pick. Ryan Finley. I wonder what team he's on these days. Will Greer got drafted in the 3rd round. I don't think he's around anymore. It's just Trace McSorley.
Gopher killer.
Yep.
Hey, he came in for Lamar. Was it that game that they played on like a Tuesday morning or something?
Yep.
I think he started or came in. He looked pretty good.
Okay, all right, let's move on to 2020. This was the year I was mentioning with 5 successful borderline quarterbacks here. Start with the number 1 overall pick in Joe Burrow. Had a lot of success in college. Was an older prospect. Struggled with injuries to this point, but besides that, everybody would say, no doubt about it, he's a franchise quarterback. You move on to the Miami Dolphins at number 5 overall, Tua. Tua's had his injury concerns as well, but when he's throwing the ball and healthy, he's as good as they come as far as showing that he is worth a second contract for the Dolphins and could be the face of their franchise for the future.
So I've kind of heard mixed things about that. Are they going to let him walk?
There are some rumors that they might not. He might not be the guy, and he could be a system guy in that Mike McDaniel's offense that they have going there. So I think from a numbers perspective, he's put up really good numbers and shown that he can throw the ball. But what we were talking about earlier is this a guy you want to invest $50 million to? And it sounds like that some people or some reporters are not 100% sure that's the direction that they want to go moving forward.
So now does it look into a trade so you can recoup some of that value rather than letting him walk for free? You see what happens when you let a good quarterback walk for free.
This might become the trend. Kwesi might be starting a trend. If you don't absolutely love your quarterback, let him walk and let somebody else pay him. Obviously, Kirk did it this spring. It feels like the same thing's happening to Dak Prescott in Dallas. And maybe Tua's right behind that. So maybe we're getting into this era of the NFL where you are kind of recycling your quarterback position every 4 years. I mean, I guess the Bears did it to an extent with Justin Fields too.
Yeah. I feel like
a little different situation, but
yeah, we have to see a little bit more of that trend in order to actually see it as something.
Well, it could be 3 big name quarterbacks in a row.
Yeah.
Well, look at Aaron Rodgers. They didn't want to pay him.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at that and it's all about the rosters around him. Like that Dallas roster has a ton of talent and is a very expensive roster. Miami, very expensive roster. So it's where you're going to put those dollars. And if they don't think that they're going to maximize those dollars with the quarterbacks that they have, does it make sense to take a stab at the first round rookie quarterback and building that roster around him. So it's interesting. I don't know that
Right.
we're there yet, but I could see that becoming a trend
New
if you don't
trend.
think that's a guy. Yeah.
Yeah, like a running back, just every 4 years. If
Yep.
you don't want to pay him, just take a guy who's really similar. If not, has potential to be better. The Dolphins aren't sold on Tua for the foreseeable future. Take Penix, let him sit there for a year, and in a year you have bargaining power with Tua. You say, hey, we have a plan in the future, and you're more than welcome to go and see if some other team will pay you.
It'll be interesting to see if that really does open up the quarterback market in the back half of the draft with
For sure.
Miami, Dallas, and then Seattle kind of comes to mind too. Not that they're paying Geno the same type of money that those other two are going to be expecting,
Yep.
but
Did you see the fluff pieces they put out today on the Falcons? Falcons might not be done at quarterback, at addressing the
I
quarterback
did see
room.
that. I did see
Like,
that.
it was like just put out by the team, clearly. Like, I think the article brought me literally to AtlantaFalcons.com. So it's like,
so
nice.
they're saying that Atlanta is in the market for a quarterback at 8.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think it was
or not
necessarily at eight,
necessarily at 8. It
but
was
that
just in the draft at some
yeah,
point.
that they want to add to the quarterback room. And again, Kirk's an
He
older
should.
player coming off a major injury, but they did have Desmond Ritter on the roster too, who again is clearly not a starter, but should be a fine backup.
I thought they traded him.
They did, yeah. They traded him.
Okay.
I think he's in Seattle. No, I don't even know where Arizona, right?
Yeah.
Arizona.
It was Arizona.
Yeah, he'll learn from Kyler. There you go. It just gives me flashbacks to when we were evaluating that quarterback class. We'll get to that one here. We're almost there. Justin Herbert, number 6 overall pick in that 2020 NFL draft. People view that as a success. We can argue each way. And then we got Jordan Love finally at number 26 with the Packers. People now viewing that as a successful pick. It's only been 1 year. Obviously, things can change, but it looks to be trending in the right direction.
See, like all those quarterbacks, I feel like most people would consider them successes, but you definitely can make the argument against all of them.
Right, because it's
So
still
it's like-
early in their careers, especially for a guy like Love. But
Love did it for 1 year. Burrow's only been healthy for like 1 year. They went to the Super Bowl, but
more than 1 year.
well, he's had a couple big injuries, but
People would consider Herbert the most successful out of all of those guys, just with Burrow's injury too. And again, Tom, you mentioned this earlier, but just the coaching and that has just been an awful situation for him there. Yeah.
And I didn't really realize how bad it was until we played the Chargers I think it was this year, and how many dumb decisions Brandon Staley made. Like, they should have blown us out that game.
Yep.
And we should have won.
Yep.
In the end. Brandon Staley should have been fired the next day after. We should have completed the comeback and finished it off, and then he should have been fired the next day.
So 2021 leaves some things to be desired after reading off that 2020 class. So we're hoping that 2024 is a little bit closer to 2020 than 2021. You have the number 1 overall pick with Trevor Lawrence, who is supposed to be the next best thing since Peyton Manning as far as a prospect goes. And then, I mean, I still think he has all the talent in the world. It's just the Jaguars have really struggled.
There's been some questions about the decision making too, because that team has a lot of talent around it. And like Doug Peterson, Super Bowl winning head coach. So I think that there are pieces there. And I think there are more questions about Trevor Lawrence. And again, if we're talking about talent, he has all the talent in the world, but I think there's more questions, even more so about like a Justin Herbert with a guy like Trevor Lawrence. I think this upcoming season will be a huge factor in determining kind of where he goes from here too. So
Yeah,
I'm not ready to write it off.
Everybody's just kind of waiting for that season where he puts it all together and throws for 30 plus touchdowns.
Right.
Under 10 interceptions would be great, but it's just
I feel like that's going to be this year.
Consistency.
I feel like
I thought that last year.
Yeah, I think last year everybody was so excited to jump on the bandwagon because of that come from behind playoff victory against the Chargers, I think. But this year they have so many weapons on offense that they've got to get it figured out.
Agreed.
And I feel like
You
the
look-
defense is pretty solid too.
Yeah, they definitely have a lot of pressure riding on them this upcoming year for that, to figure out that contract situation. Zach Wilson, pick number 2, goes into the Jets. Complete bust as far as what we thought of him coming in. I think I remember not too long ago saying Zach Wilson could be that special, the way he can throw the ball on the run and just able to sling it at any arm angle possible. Kind of scares you for certain types of prospects that are coming out, because you really don't know. I mean, you watch the film, you can see tendencies, but it's just hard to tell as far from an outsider looking in. Maybe the level of competition, something to look into with a guy coming out of a smaller school. It seems like the majority of the players who have gone to bigger schools have had higher rates of success in the past, but it's definitely not the only thing. You look at the number 3 pick, Trey Lance. Also, we mentioned that in the previous episode. Looking like a bust, only played in 8 games. Justin
He's kind of got
Fields.
he's had an unfair go. I mean, he got the starting job in 2022, and then he got hurt after 5 or 6 quarters, and then Brock Purdy just, started driving the car, and he just didn't crash.
Yeah, I would like to see Lance get another go at it, but you think that with him playing and practice and all of this over the last couple years outside of his injury, that we would hear more rave reviews if he was actually hoping to be pressing for a starter position on any team in the NFL, and that clearly didn't come to fruition yet.
Well, again, moving teams doesn't help. Like, the Niners invested 3 first-round picks in him, and so they had an incentive to develop him. And I think he was much more of a project than we really realized coming out of college. And so after he gets this injury and Brock Purdy takes over the job, they ship him off to Dallas. Well, Dallas doesn't really have too much of an incentive to walk him through the offense, walk him through progressions, and really develop him the way he would have been developed in San Francisco.
Unless they think he's the quarterback of the future.
I don't know.
What did they trade for him? Was it a 4th or a 5th round pick? So I mean, it's not like conditional. So it's not like they invested a ton of draft capital. So my hunch is that they don't think he's the quarterback of the future there. But I mean, you're taking a chance on the talent at that price, which he clearly had coming out of the draft. Go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead. Finish.
I'll switch gears a little bit because I know this is a guy we're going to talk about here shortly, but I remember the big conversation heading into that draft week was, could the 49ers take Mac Jones at pick 3 overall? And like, he just fits that Kyle Shanahan offense. He wants an accurate quarterback. He doesn't necessarily need the mobility. And we've touched a lot on situational stuff here today. So what does it look like if Mac Jones ends up in San Francisco? Could we be talking about Mac Jones leading that team to Super Bowls? Or is that just not talent-wise or didn't line up?
I think it would have been Mac Jones missing Debo in the end zone or missing Ayuk in the end zone and losing the Super Bowl instead of Brock Purdy. That's what it would have been.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have worked out fully for Mac Jones. I think it would have been similar to the Jimmy Garoppolo story there, where he would do enough to get you by with that defense and that running game, but then you see his crutch when it comes to the biggest moment.
Okay, so say they take Mac Jones at 3 and they do he does exactly what Brock Purdy's done. Is that a successful pick?
I would say so, because that's how it's viewed in today's NFL. It's where you're drafted and what you do.
How many, does anybody know how many touchdowns Purdy had off the top of his head last year? Because he had a pretty good season.
I think it was like 35 almost.
That's incredible.
I think it was for sure 30.
Let's
look it up.
But yeah, just looking at Trey Lance is 23 years old still.
Yeah.
So it is crazy. I mean, when you come in young with the COVID year, college, and get traded and break your leg, it's like a lot of stuff hasn't gone well for him,
Right.
obviously. Does he still have a chance in this league? Sure. You're still young. As long as you're still on an NFL roster, anything can happen, injuries, get your chance and run with it.
Kind of also shifting back to Zach Wilson. We probably should have known he wasn't ready to run an NFL locker room when it came out that he was sleeping with his mom's best friend. That just doesn't scream the maturity that is needed to handle New York City or a terrible Jets organization. Great arm talent, but those are some important characteristics you need as a quarterback to be successful. Are we moving on to Justin Fields?
What do you view him as? I don't think he's a success. He didn't get the tools around him, but I still don't think he's a well developed enough of a quarterback to build around as a franchise. So I think the Bears did the right thing by on from him.
Say Justin Fields gets drafted by the Baltimore Ravens and has John Harbaugh as their head coach instead of, is it Nagy and Eberflus? Are we talking about Justin Fields a little differently?
I don't know. I think it's still up in the
Yeah, I think
would
they
help.
could be. I think the other thing I get kind of focused on with Fields is he had such a good fantasy season, and that did not translate into real football success. And there's just been so much talk about the inability to read a defense. And I think he was a guy that would have benefited from having the Aaron Rodgers or the Jordan Love treatment and sat a true 3 years. And I think Trey Lance probably could kind of fall in that same bucket, but a guy who is truly a project pick, who you have a somewhat established veteran in place to where you have an opportunity to really develop that person. And clearly the arm talent, the athleticism, all of that is there to be the face of a franchise. But it's just the learning, reading defenses portion that are the big question marks with some of those guys. So I think there is some situational stuff with this. And I'm really curious to see how his career kind of pans out from here. Obviously, Russell Wilson is just on a 1-year deal in Pittsburgh. And I believe Justin Fields is on his final year of his contract as well. So it'll be really curious to see what his contract looks like, if the Steelers invest in him as kind of the franchise quarterback moving forward, or what that looks like. So I have no idea, but it's going to be fun to see it play out for sure.
But do you think that Chicago catered the offense to his skill set? You do think they did?
I think they did in terms of just literally running the football. I do think there were well, let me back up a little bit, because I think if we go back and see Justin Fields tape mostly, where he would drop back, he was already planning to run. It doesn't matter if it was whatever read it was, he had predetermined that he was going to take off and run. So I think that there was a lot of that. But I do think they did develop a lot of read option type plays around his system. So I think yes and no. I think he was in a position, and those teams did not have a lot of talent around him. That was pre DJ Moore, obviously pre Keenan Allen too. So they did not have the receiving core that they have in place today. But there was a lot of predetermined, I'm going to tuck the ball and run, and just him scrambling immediately before even, I think, starting his progressions.
Yeah, I think it left a lot to be desired once you really dove into the All 22 film on him. And as far as when the Vikings defense played him, sure, his legs would scare the crap out of you, but I was never scared of him as a passer, drop back, 2-minute drill, always going to pass it type quarterback. And that's where I think a lot of quarterbacks struggle with dissecting defenses deep into their rookie contract. You're really not there year 3. It's kind of hard. That's what a lot of NFL GMs view as the make it or break it year. and that's when you can make your decision, quarterback.
I guess I
Mac-
would have given him one more year. I think I would have. I know I've told you guys this before, but I think I would have taken Marvin Harrison Jr. at 1. And then if I really didn't want Fields, I would maybe try to trade up from 9. But I would have liked to see what Fields could have done with Keenan Allen, DJ Moore,
You're sitting there
DeAndre
with a
Swift, and an
generational
improved
talent.
offensive line.
I disagree. You're sitting there with Caleb Williams on the board, and you make a tough decision now. So
We've
next
just
year's
gone over all
quarterback
these
class.
quarterbacks. They're not guarantees. Caleb Williams not a guarantee. Joe Burrow was the number 1 pick, and he's had some success. Trevor Lawrence, we're still debating if that's a good pick or not. 3 years later, Kyler, same thing. Like, so I right today we say Caleb Williams is a generational talent, but in 3 years we might say, yeah, he's been fine.
I guess they're willing to take that risk and not pay the quarterback and reset their market.
Well, they could have picked up his 5th-year option. They didn't have to reset the quarterback market.
Eventually, they would have had to pay him.
Well, if
50 plus million.
yeah, but if he doesn't pan out, then they would have been picking in the top 3 again.
Part of it could be to Ryan Poles wanting to make his stamp and get his guy too, just because he did not draft Justin Fields. And I think that's typically something we see out of GMs is they want their guy, which is what we'll most likely see this draft with Kwesi too. So I think that could play a part in it as well.
That's what scares me about the Giants pick is that Joe Shane with the Giants is going to want his own guy. And obviously he drafted Josh Allen years ago.
I did a little bit of
Was on the
Giants
run with
research
that.
today. Their Reddit accounts, their YouTube accounts, Schefter, I think everything's pointing to trying to trade into the top 5 for a quarterback.
That's really the only team I would be worried about for stealing one of the top 4 from us, realistically. Obviously, you still have the Broncos, but I think it's going to be a lot harder for them to do. All right, let's dive into the 2022. Obviously, we had Mac Jones in 2021. He's no longer. He's on the Jaguars now, so
Duval.
just crazy the amount of quarterbacks that are on different teams already so soon into their NFL careers. Desmond Ridder, 3rd round. Let's see. 1st round here.
Kenny Pickett.
Kenny Pickett, the one and only.
And
View him as a success?
no. I don't think there's probably a success from this quarterback class.
He's on the Eagles now as a backup. So, yeah.
So, Kev, I kind of went back and watched one of our podcasts from one of our draft podcasts. And
when
we were
like
talking.
Malik Willis?
Yeah, I mean, we were sitting here talking about, this team needs a quarterback, this team needs a quarterback, this team needs a quarterback. They're all going to trade up and try to get a quarterback. Like we thought Detroit might.
Yep.
We thought Pittsburgh would. We thought New Orleans would. So sometimes I kind of think the quarterback tax and stuff like that, we build it up a little bit too much. Like that year, I kind of thought there's 4 or 5 quarterbacks that might sneak into the 1st round. And there was just Kenny Pickett. Obviously, none of them were top tier, but I thought a few of them were good enough to get into the back end.
Yeah, that year was not a good year for quarterbacks, just looking at it. I mean, comparatively speaking, I know that this year's not a lock for anything, but if you're looking at the prospects that were coming, Kenny Pickett should not have been a 1st-round pick. Desmond Ridder was a 3rd-round pick, but, I mean, he belonged as a 3rd or 4th-round pick. Malik Willis, super developmental quarterback. Matt Corral, not even in the
hindsight's
league
2020,
anymore.
but in April, there were mock drafts saying Detroit would take Malik Willis at 1. Like, there was conversation about that.
I thought very highly of Malik Willis too. And again, I am not a tape guy. I'm not going back and watching all of these games, but you go and this is the classic, like watching a pro day and you see the arm talent with these pre-designed routes, and you see that cannon, and then you see the athletic profile that goes along with it. Of course, that guy's a first round talent, right? But then you look back, and it's like, could he read a defense? All these different factors that the casual observer does not know the ins and outs of, and I went back and read some stuff, and Tom, like you said, there were a lot of not just first round mocks, but there were first overall picks of Malik Willis going first overall. And so that's where it's funny to see that clearly the NFL evaluators have a lot more that goes into these evaluations and looking at this, which is good for us. But yeah, it's really funny to look back and see some of those things too.
I remember people were so high on Matt Corral too.
Yeah.
They thought he was going to be a mid first round pick.
Yep.
But kind of Will Levis last year. I feel like what happened to Will Levis happened to all of the quarterbacks in 2022.
Totally.
But yeah, holy cow,
could
that
see
combine
something similar, but I don't think so this year. I think the quarterbacks are just that much better.
I think so too. I don't think they're all going to fall into the third or fourth rounds, but maybe they don't all go 1, 2, 3, 4.
If Jim McCarthy, the prospect, got taken out from this year's prospect class and put into that year, would he?
I think he's the first overall pick.
Right. So that's how crazy it is. You talk about the 4th overall quarterback in this year's draft, maybe the 5th. It's like you put Michael Penix in that draft. Like, he had way better tape than Pickett?
Yeah.
So it's just crazy. I think this year is going to be really different. Really different. All right, we got one more year to get caught up on here. Last year, still really early to tell. Bryce Young, the number 1 overall pick. C.J. Stroud, number 2 to Houston. And then you got Anthony Richardson at 4. So 3 quarterbacks all in the top 5 overall. All of who shot up mock draft boards to the top. Obviously, Will Levis was the one who didn't make it into the first round, getting picked with the first pick in the second round on day 2.
And I don't know if maybe I'm a little alone on this, but I never really understood the Will Levis hype. I mean, I get that he was kind of his big body and big arm, but I didn't think he looked that impressive on the highlight reel, and his statistics didn't really back up the hype either. And I get that he was on a bad team and he suffered through some injuries, but I never truly understood the hype.
I think it's just he has all of the tools that you think you could develop. It's just if you look at that guy who walks into the room, you're like, I can work with this in the next level. And sounds like they're ready to work with him as the foreseeable starter there, QB1 in Tennessee, and they're going to give him Calvin Ridley, Hopkins. They're going to have a fun offense. They just signed Tony Pollard, so they're definitely going to give him every opportunity there. Fortify that offensive line maybe early with their 7th overall pick. Should be fun to see his development. And you look what can happen when you go to a team that has talent as a quarterback that has all of the tools like Levis did. It is interesting to go back, though, like you said, Tom, just watching the tape compared to some of the tape that I've seen on these quarterbacks, and nothing really popped outside of his athleticism and maybe deep ball, but it wasn't consistent. So,
he kind of made me think of another former Titans quarterback, Jake Locker, a little bit. And we all know where Jake Locker ended up, and so that's kind of maybe why I didn't really like Will Levis that much.
That was when I was like very first into like deep diving into quarterbacks and NFL drafts back
Jake
then.
Locker was so hyped.
I wanted him bad.
I loved Jake Locker that year too. That and Blaine Gabbert. Those were two guys that I thought could and should have been Vikings, and look where we are today.
Shows you how much we.
Well, I think we were
sitting here.
We were gonna take Jake Locker. And he went like 1 or 2 picks ahead of us.
Yep.
And then we ended up having to take Christian Ponder.
Right.
We panicked.
And I don't know which pick ended up worse. Ponder at least made the playoffs.
We
Yeah.
should have just moved back and taken Dalton, but no.
Yeah.
Didn't want the Red Rock.
I will say, going back to Will Levis, I didn't watch a lot of like his college games or anything like that, but just based on the limited games I saw of him last year in Tennessee, I won't be surprised if we're talking about Tennessee taking a quarterback next draft. It didn't pop. And again, he's a toolsy guy. That's what a lot of these teams are hoping, and they have a pretty improved offense in Tennessee. So hope for the best for him and them, but I'm not 100% sold on Will Levis being the franchise guy in Tennessee either.
I think
He
he's going to
looked
have.
good. He looked good last year.
I think he's going to have high highs and low lows.
Yeah.
I think he's just going to have those games where he throws 3 picks and they lose.
The other guys in that class too, I mean, they're all coming back as starters for their team this year. Anthony Richardson was a guy that the Vikings were rumored to go up and be enamored with last year's class. So I thought he looked pretty good in limited time. I think, again, athletic guy who used his athleticism maybe to his detriment in some of these plays. He got popped a few times trying to tuck and run the ball a little bit. But yeah, I think he looked pretty good, or at least looked the part. So I'm hoping that year 2 for him is pretty successful, and that Indianapolis team they're okay. They have some decent weapons. We'll see kind of how that turns out. Not a huge sample size for him last year. And Bryce Young is just such an intriguing case to me. And I think that the Panthers have been subject to, again, some really bad coaching and ownership there. I'm not 100% sure, but I loved Bryce Young in college. So I'm rooting for him to succeed as well. Obviously, old friend Adam Thielen was his wide receiver 1 last year. So I'd like to see them invest in some more weapons for Bryce Young in the draft. So it'll be fun and interesting to see kind of where these guys all end up. But like you said, Kev, I think it's very early for all these guys to give any sort of final verdict on where they are.
The other name that's on that list from last year's draft is Hendon Hooker. There was a lot of talk that he might have gone to the Vikings at 22 or 23.
Yeah, in a normal year without injury, he would have been a first-round pick. I think you could add.
Well,
that to the list.
he's also an older prospect too, so that might have went against him.
Yeah, I was going to say, wasn't he 25 or 26 at the time of the draft? Like quite a bit older.
Like closer to Brandon Weeden, your guy, Pat.
Hey, Brandon Weeden had some good years. He was stuck with the Cleveland dumpster fire, but
guys, I thought that was the Trent Richardson draft as well. I thought that they hit a home run with Trent Richardson and Brandon Weeden. So again, please don't listen to my thoughts on anything moving forward, clearly.
running backs that do that are so weird.
Oof.
If you just look back at history, that just have amazing starts to their career. Like, didn't he win Rookie of the Year?
I think so.
I'm pretty sure.
There must have been something about that draft too, because that was the Matt Khalil draft, right? Where he came out and had an amazing
first year.
Yeah, amazing first year, and then just fell off a cliff.
He not necessarily didn't fall off. I mean, he got traded for a first-round pick to the Colts.
Yeah.
Which was also wild. So maybe it was off the field issues that I don't know why if you have a guy that's the centerpiece of your team and you just ship him off for, I guess if you could get a first-round pick for a running back.
Right.
Did the Browns also have Josh Gordon on that team?
Ooh, I think he was a supplemental pick. I don't know if that was the same year, but I think he was a second round supplemental draft guy. But that could have been the same.
I think he was on the same. Yeah, I think so. Cleveland was probably excited to have Trent Richardson and then Josh Gordon, like kind of an up and coming offense.
Was that? Do you guys remember Jordan Cameron too, the tight end? He had one really big year. USC guy, I think.
I think
he
so.
Had one really big year at tight end as well.
I had him on fantasy, yeah.
I drafted him the next year and he sucked.
All right, I found it. So they shipped him off after one season.
It's
The
wild.
It
Trent
was only
Richardson.
1 year.
Well, he got traded to the Colts 15 months after playing, or after.
Getting drafted.
That's wild.
Wow. That was when the Vikings went from 2 to 3, and they took Trent Richardson, right? We traded back one
Yeah.
spot and took Khalil.
Yep.
And then that year they took Manziel, Justin Gilbert, and
Bad draft. I don't know what happened to Justin Gilbert. I mean, he was everyone's consensus cornerback 1 that year.
cornerbacks that get drafted that high. That's another study that for a
Like
whole
Jeff
nother day.
Okudah. How did
Yeah.
that? Watching his tape, he looked like a can't miss cornerback.
It's
sure.
got to be like 50% hit rate of cornerbacks drafted in the top 10.
And then was it 2 years ago, 22? You have Gardner and Stingley, who have both been pretty good.
Right.
Right. And I wanted both of them so badly. So, hey, we're right about some stuff.
Yeah. Before Sauce ran that 4-4, he was falling to 12 every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I know. It's just crazy to go back in our brains and look at all of the mock drafts we used to do. I remember when Cam Newton would fall to me every single time. I wanted
At 12?
it so bad.
The only quarterback that panned out that draft.
And then
Yep.
he just decided to win a national championship and a Heisman. Kind of hurt his chances of falling.
Yep.
All right, let's take a dive before we wrap up the show this time around. Let's look at a little bit of the Vikings draft history here. Just kind of looking back at the early 2000s, then we'll go into the Spielman era and current Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. 2 drafts in. He's on his 3rd draft. Hopefully he figures out what he's doing by now. Let's start what's a good year to start, Tom?
Well, when I was looking over some of these old drafts, I noticed 2005 might be the worst draft we've ever had.
Let's start in 2003.
I'm sure you can go back further, but
2003 is the first memory I have of a Minnesota Vikings draft because we missed our pick.
calm down.
Kevin Williams was our pick at number 8, and we didn't run the ticket up. Or was it number 7? And then they gave him to us at 9. You see, he was still there.
Yeah, 2 teams jumped up, Jacksonville and Carolina or somebody.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if that happened in today's NFL?
Have you heard the story of what happened?
No.
They had a trade agreed upon with, I want to say it was Baltimore. And there was something that happened. They were trying to call, or they sent in the trade to the league, but Baltimore didn't send it in on their end.
Oh, I think.
And
I
so
do
the
remember
clock
hearing this.
ran out, and then all these other teams jumped up ahead of them. So there was some sort of miscommunication between the Vikings. I think it was the Baltimore Ravens, but they just ignored it, or they didn't call in. And
Well, it's on us. And
it worked out, though. Kevin Williams was probably one of the best picks in that whole draft.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that's who we were going to take anyways.
I think that's what they said, right? Didn't they say? And they
We
probably
got
would
our
say,
guy.
yeah, they would say that regardless. But
Yeah, they would. Interesting. Yeah, that was probably our best draft pick in team history, I would say. It was Kevin.
Oh, so then Baltimore drafted. So we ended up at 9, and Baltimore drafted at 10, and they took Terrell Suggs.
wow.
Dang. That's crazy. Both really good picks.
I won.
Right.
Yeah.
2004, Kenichi Udeze. All right, 2005 was Troy Williamson and Erasmus James. That was the Randy Moss trade result. I forget which pick we got from the Raiders. Probably
The 7.
Oh, it was 7?
It was 7. Yeah.
That was Troy Williamson. Oof.
Bang.
But we got Napoleon Harris. So
Gosh, he was so good with the Raiders, and then I feel like he was bad with us.
Yeah.
Or just okay. But look at that.
That's how it
Look at
always
this
happens.
2005 draft. I mean, the best pick for what was C.J. Mosley, and he didn't even play for us.
yep.
It was bad. And then things got better. 2006, you could say, was one of our quarterbacks we've drafted in franchise history, T-Jack.
Yep.
Ray Edwards was a good pick. Ryan Cook, serviceable lineman. Cedric Griffin, longtime starter at corner. Chad Greenway, all-time Viking great.
Started out rough, but yeah.
Oof.
These were back in the days where we didn't draft like more than 7 players each draft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was the Greenway injury on the very first kickoff of the very first preseason game? Unbelievable.
So, yeah. I remember
It might have
that.
been week 1.
I was stoked.
Yeah, that was brutal. It was good that he came back and was like super good.
Yep.
Yeah. Gives us hope for Lewis Seen.
Yeah.
Maybe
Hopefully.
he can learn a thing or two.
In 2007, I think is when Spielman kind of comes in.
Yeah, I believe it was either 07 or 08 they ruled that as his first draft, technically, where he
I think it
calling
was
the
07
shots.
because even the other day he mentioned something on his podcast about taking Adrian Peterson when they had Chester Taylor still.
Got it.
So I think 07 was the first time
It was a smart pick.
That was a great
he was
draft.
involved.
Number 7 overall. And
Sydney
then
as well, right?
Rice.
Yeah.
Yep. Marcus McCauley was a bust, but is a third-round corner. We were so bad at drafting cornerbacks. We've never been good at drafting corners. Outside of Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes, I would say. Brian Robinson that year was a 4th-round pick in 07. Turned out
Good
to
pick.
be
He had a
really
good career.
player.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even Tyler Thigpen in the 7th.
Tyler.
He
was a solid-
started games for the Chiefs, right?
Yeah.
Oh
he
my
he
God.
was pretty solid
That sounds
for a
like
for a 7th-round quarterback, starting some games.
Yeah, we drafted some quarterbacks back then. Look at us.
Yeah.
And the next year, this draft could go to the garbage, probably.
Yeah, this is the other one that stood out. The
Tyrell
only
Johnson, the worst draft pick ever.
I think it was gonna be good.
John David Booty in the 5th round. Where did all of our draft picks go? Was this the
Jared Allen?
Jared Allen.
Yep.
Okay, because we only had 1 second-round pick and then no pick until the 5th. And then we got John Sullivan in the 6th. So
That's a great pick.
Basically, you got Jared Allen and John Sullivan from that draft.
Yep. And
Honestly, that's okay.
Yeah. I don't really know what happened to those other picks, though. I thought Jared Allen was just a straight 1 first-round pick. So I don't know what happened to all those other picks.
Tampering. Who knows? 2009, we always just hit on a couple, and then the rest, nothing. Percy Harvin, pretty good hit. Phil
Lodeholt
Lodeholt
was good.
Pretty good hit.
Yep.
Asher Allen, another whiff. Jasper Brinkley.
That's a hit.
He started some,
Marcus Hanford,
yeah.
7th-round pick.
They both started a lot of games.
Yeah.
And, here's my favorite. Chris Cook in 2010. He was so bad. Out of
He was
Virginia.
big, though.
Toby Gerhart, Everson, Chris Geary, Joe Webb. Any other notable names here? We go up to 2011. Ponder, of course. This draft was rough. Looking at the totality.
Going through all these, it's just such a crapshoot.
It
I mean,
is.
there's a lot of names on here that I was really excited about the day of. 3 years later, it was terrible.
Yeah. 2012, Matt Khalil, 4th overall pick. Harrison Smith, 29th pick. Then
That's a pretty good draft. Harrison Smith, Jarius Wright, Rhett Ellison, Robert Blanton started a bunch of games. Blair Walsh, people forget how good he was his first year. Audie Cole was a pretty solid.
I was excited about Greg Childs that year. I thought that he was going to be a really good player. Too bad for injuries. It would have been fun to see him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he tore like 8 ACLs in his career.
Yeah, I don't think he had any cartilage left in his knees.
No.
All right, and then 2013, everybody remembers that draft. We had 3 first-round picks. Sharif Floyd at 23, Xavier Rhodes at 25, Patterson at 29. I would say mostly successful for those picks. Outside of that draft was crap.
Really
Gerald
rough.
Hodges was fine.
2014 was Zimmer's first year as a head coach. We took Anthony Barr at the 9th overall pick, moved back up from round 2 and took Teddy with the last pick, like we mentioned. Scott Crichton, remember that name? Whoa.
Oh,
Yeah.
Jerick McKinnon, good day 2 draft pick there in the 3rd round. David Yankee, Anton Exum. Man, Shamar Stephen, good value there in the 7th.
Yeah.
It's always about like finding one guy who lasted out of like our 5th through 7th round. I feel like these years it was just such a crapshoot. We'd hit on one of our early guys and one of our later guys, but never a whole draft. 2015 was our best draft. Trey Waynes at pick 11. He was always a bit of a disappointment from where he got drafted, but if you look at it from a longevity standpoint, I think you'd call it a success. Eric Hendricks, more than a success. Daniil Hunter, of course. Stephon Diggs.
What a great draft that was.
And we're looking at 2016, not so good of a draft.
Boy, looking at where we pick in the first round every year really just shows how the Vikings have never been bad enough to be in the top 5 except for the Khalil year. And
Yeah.
they're never good enough to be at 30, 31, 32.
That's why I'm like, I mean, I don't think we're going to be in the top 10 anytime soon. So it's like, might as well take advantage while we're close to it, right?
Right.
Doesn't hurt. Laquan Treadwell, 23rd overall pick. Mackenzie Alexander. Willie Beavers, Kentrell Brothers, Moritz Barger.
That's a bad draft.
Real bad. But then we had like Stephen Weatherly and J-Ron Kearse who were rotational
Pretty
guys.
solid.
So it's like
Yep.
he saves himself at the end. Dalvin Cook, 2017. Pat Elflein, Jaleel Johnson, Ben Gideon, Rodney Adams, Danny Isadora, Bucky Hodges, Stacy Coley.
Now we're getting into the era
man.
of Rick where he just took all the 7th round draft picks.
Yeah, Odenabo.
Was that
Yeah,
Sam
week
Bradford
4.
year? Is that why we were missing a first?
Yeah, that's sad. That was a sad draft as well, minus Dalvin.
Gosh, I was so excited for Dalvin when he came.
Oh,
Me
man.
too. That was probably the most excited I was.
I took
was
him in
that-
the first round of our fantasy football draft that year. He
I
was a
remember
second
that.
round rookie
Yeah.
running back.
Yeah,
No,
he
was-
fell. He should not have fallen to the 2nd round in that.
Did Joe Mixon go ahead of him? Because wasn't Joe Mixon the other guy that was kind of in that same area? Did he go right ahead of Dalvin, or was it right after?
I'm not sure.
We don't need to.
They were pretty close, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both 2nd round picks. Mixon went
Buda Baker went.
7 picks later.
Yeah, that's crazy. So if we wouldn't have traded, or no, that was our 2nd round pick. That's right.
Oh, and Christian McCaffrey and Leonard Fournette were in that draft.
Wow.
It's a good running back class.
Then we got moving into the recent years here. 2018, Mike Hughes didn't work out. Brian O'Neill, great pick. Jalen Holmes, terrible. Tyler Conklin, good pick. Carlson, and didn't work out. Don't draft
Carlson's a great
kickers.
pick.
Not
Just
for
not
us.
for us.
2019, we got Bradbury. You could argue it was a good pick. He's still on our team. Irv Smith Jr., obviously, injuries didn't work out. Madison, serviceable running back for us as a backup. I would say that's a good pick. Drew Samia, awful.
I was
That's a
so
name I
pumped
forgot about.
to get Drew Samia. That dude had a mean streak in college, and I was like, oh, this guy's
Yeah.
going to be a mauler. He's going to be mean. He's going to he was so weak.
Funny story about that draft, Tom. I don't know if you remember, but we ran into each other at Avengers Endgame. We were in the same movie theater for Avengers Endgame.
Yeah.
And while we were in the movie, that's when Irv Smith Jr. was drafted. And you said right after the movie, did you see we got Irv Smith Jr.? I'm like, Irv Smith Jr.? But we already have Kyle Rudolph coming off of a solid season. Can't believe that was already 5 years ago.
Yeah, people were upset because we're like, we didn't need a tight end, but we were just stacking our assets. We're trying to get as many young talent as
I
we
can't
could.
believe Endgame was already 5 years ago.
I know. I believe it was Endgame. I believe Endgame came out in April.
That was at the White Bear Theater.
Yep.
Irv Smith signed with the Chiefs, if you guys didn't see that.
Pat, you weren't even married yet, right?
No.
Yeah.
I was with my future wife at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I was with my wife at the time, too,
Yep.
I think. Yeah.
Well, 2020 was a good draft. See, that's the thing. It's just like we have so many draft picks that it's... Oh, yeah. You could say this is good. I mean, you get Jefferson, of course. Jeff Gladney, RIP. Didn't work out at all. Ezra Cleveland, second round. You could say it worked out. Technically, he started for us for a number of years. Cameron Dantzler didn't really work out long term. DJ Wanham was a hit. James Lynch, he's serviceable at some point. Harrison Hand, Troy Dye.
Troy Dye played way too many games.
I know.
Yep.
He was my least favorite.
But then you got KJ Osborne, Blake Brandel, Josh Metellus. I mean, those guys are
Those
all
nice.
hits.
Yep.
It was a good draft for a lot of guys we found later. 2021, really bad draft for Rick, I would say. Darisaw, and then just 3 straight whiffs in the third round. We had 4 third-round picks. Kellen Mond, Chaz Surratt, Wyatt Davis, Patrick Jones is second. So
I can't believe none of them panned out.
One of them is still on the team.
Yep.
Kene Wongwu hasn't really done much outside of be a returner. And then you got Cam Bynum, who's his only saving grace from that draft, who he didn't even really develop. So I would say the last 2 years underneath Kwesi is when Bynum found himself.
And can you kind of tell that him and Zimmer didn't probably talk much during that draft?
Probably, yeah.
Like, Zimmer didn't play any of those guys.
No.
He must not have wanted any of them.
Smith
no, there's
Marset.
quite a bit of dysfunction going on at the end of the
Remember
their
Jalen
tenure.
Twyman? Didn't he get shot?
Yeah, he did.
He's in the UFL.
Jeez, that's a name drop.
Now,
I was excited for him.
Wasn't that the year, too, that it was pretty heavily rumored that Rick was very interested in moving up for Justin Fields?
Yeah.
That's what Bears fans like to say. Is
Yeah.
they tried to trade. The Vikings tried to trade up with Carolina, and they said no to their offer.
Could.
We got
very
Kellen
well have
Mond.
been.
I think the truth is that they were going to go get J.C. Horn.
Mm.
But Fields would have been interesting.
Yeah.
How has Horn been as a player? Pretty good?
Horn?
Yeah.
I think he's been fine.
Yeah, he's another one of those corners that got taken really high. Then we look at our last couple of years with Kwesi. Lewis Cine,
I mean,
Andrew
22 is
Booth.
bad.
Ed Ingram, Asamoah, Caleb Evans, Isezi Otomewu, Ty Chandler, Vidarian Lowe, Jalen Naylor, Nick Muse. You're looking at 2 years ago, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them are still on the roster, but they're barely hanging on.
I think this will be an interesting year, too, because, I mean, we'll see supposedly Ty Chandler with an increased workload. There's been a lot of talk about Jalen Naylor and how they really like him as a player. So I think that with OKJ on this roster, that he's going to get more snaps this year, too. So that'll be an interesting development. And
Dude has to
Obviously,
get new hamstrings, though.
yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna
that's
say
very
he's
true.
always hurt.
It's
He's
his
always been
hamstring
hurt.
every time. And he was out the whole year last year. He wasn't even suited up for games. We had Tristan Jackson suited up.
Yeah.
We had frickin' N'Keal Harry suited up. So I don't know. I'm hopeful for Naylor too, but yeah.
And Asamoah is the other one. I think we all kind of expected him to get a lot of snaps last year, and those just did not come to fruition too. So we'll
He
see
had
if
surgery this offseason on something, and I believe that was why he was not very effective last year. So I'm hoping that's the case. I still have hope for development on Asamoah, Caleb Evans,
Yeah,
Ty
Evans
Chandler,
has
I
been
would
good
say.
at times.
But Scene and Booth, I think they've had their chance. I mean, Booth got thrown out there last year in dire situations at corner. I don't know. Something's not clicking with him. And then this last year, not too many draft picks overall, just 6 guys. Because we had a couple of UDFAs who made the roster as well. So we can kind of factor that into Kwesi's draft history, I guess, with Ivan Pace being the success that he was. But we have Jordan Addison, pretty good pick. Mekhi Blackman, you could say
He's been
it's
great.
worked out.
Yep.
Jay Ward in the 4th round. I think we'll probably see a bit more of him this year outside of special teams. And then Jacqueline Roy.
He's gonna play.
yeah,
He's going to have to play. We don't have any defensive linemen on the
Nothing
roster
else.
right now. Jaron Hall, jury's still out on him, like we mentioned. And
He's gonna
Dwayne
beat out Nick
McBride.
Mullins.
I think I was excited for McBride, but then I'm like, he literally caught 3 balls in
right.
4 years of college. Like, what's our plan with this guy? So I don't.
Well, and the name we didn't mention, Andre Carter, was the other big UDFA,
We
and
paid him the most money.
gave him a lot of money, and there was a lot of talk of him being a 2nd or even 3rd round projected pick last year too. And obviously, I don't even know if he saw any snaps last year on defense, but I think with this year, the stars are kind of penciled in, but I would imagine that we'll have to see some Andre Carter snaps at outside linebacker. So I'll be interested to see how that development kind of progresses coming into this next season as well.
I think he was out there last year for a handful of snaps, but yeah, it wasn't very many. You just think, with a guy like that, who's really just got all the height and the speed, and you'd hope he could develop, but
Yep.
you never know with those guys at all.
He's a fun project.
For sure.
I agree. All right, so that's about all we have for getting caught up on the Vikings draft history. It was a lot of dark, deep history there with
Very dark at times.
but that just prepares you for every current draft when we're super hopeful, and then year later, 3 years later, 2 years later, you look back. I mean, we're looking at 2 years later, and we already know what kind of draft choice he had. Like, sometimes it right away. So it's just pretty interesting to see. One more thing. The top 30 visits, like, do they matter? And, like, you could go down this wormhole like, oh, they brought this guy in. What does this mean? Do they really want him, or is it just smoke? Or are they bringing him in case they trade down? Or are they bringing him in to see if he has any red flags off the field, character concerns? There's so many things, but, like, we kind of understood Spielman and his draft history pretty well. There weren't too many surprises with Spielman, I would say. But also, like, when we took Mike Hughes, I had no idea who Mike Hughes was. So there's that too.
Do you feel like you know what Kwesi's gonna do?
No,
Like,
I don't.
kind of.
But I have
I don't
no
know what
idea.
to expect.
But I'm hoping to learn more, so that's why I'm kind of reading into the top 30 visits. Like Mekhi Blackman, Jordan Addison, they were on that list last year. So, I mean, if you bring in 30 guys and you draft 2 or 3 of them, it doesn't mean nothing, right? So, doesn't mean you're going to take all of them, but, like, Tom and I were looking at our top 30 list here. Do you want to pull that up, Tom? For this year? And it was pretty interesting to see. what kind of players we're bringing in as far as where they're projected to go, and what picks we might. Obviously, it could be a contingency plan, right? Plan B, plan C, plan D. So you got to have them in to know if you feel comfortable doing that trade, right? You say, okay, I'm comfortable with moving down from 11 to 28 because I still think I could get this guy or this guy who we brought in.
So with the top 30, there's only a couple like first round picks that they brought in, and it was Byron Murphy, Latu, and Dallas Turner for
Didn't
a
you
top
say
30 visit.
Quinion Mitchell as well?
I don't have him on this list.
I think I remember seeing that on Twitter, though.
They might have. Maybe they brought him in for a different workout. I don't know. I don't really know how meetings and workouts and a top 30 visit, how they all differ.
I don't know either. I think top 30 visits is
It's a weird,
just a different
weirdly regulated.
way.
Yeah, weirdly regulated. And honestly, do they matter? I'm sure, right? To some extent they do, but also these teams have had the book on all of these prospects for a number of years going back. They've talked to their high school coaches. They probably talked to their middle school coaches. Like they know who these guys are, who their families are. So I think some of it is smoke, right? You're not going to draft every single player you bring in. Obviously, you wouldn't have the ability to draft all 30 of those guys. But I do think, again, with last year, was it the first two picks that we made in Jordan Addison and Mekhi Blackman? They did end up taking both of those guys. So I think that there is some validity in who they bring in as well.
Yeah, and I think, wasn't it we moved back up to get Blackman or we moved down? It was something along those lines.
I think they moved up to get him.
Yeah,
because they were like, we knew we wanted him, and
Yep.
we found a way to get him. We made sure he knew that he would be a Viking. So I was like, yeah, certain guys, they're gonna go out of their way to do whatever it takes to get it. So I don't know. It's definitely not something to ignore. So we can keep our eyes on that leading up to the draft here. We're hoping to do a little bit of a mock draft episode, hopefully either later this week or into the weekend before the draft for sure. And then we can touch on any more news that we're hearing.
Oh, then we got to get into Pat's Wolves.
For sure, Pat's Wolves.
A lot going on.
At some point. There is a lot going on. It's really hard to keep track of. But yeah, we will be back later with more stuff for you guys. Thanks for listening as always. Skol!
Skol.
I got 'em.